Thank you very much. So, hello and welcome to my talk this afternoon. My name is McGuigan. I'm a software engineer currently working for a financial services company, and I am working on a Scala platform that helps the bank better understand its data and its data models. So I joined this team about a year and a half ago, and back then I had very little Scala knowledge. So very quickly I had to get to grips with learning Scala. So, how did I learn Scala quickly enough to become productive quickly? When trying to answer this question, undoubtedly the answer to this was the different senior engineers that I worked with and all the things they did for me. So when trying to kind of think about what they did, three key themes kept on coming up about how they helped me. First was the importance of making mistakes and being allowed to make mistakes and kind of realizing that you had to learn through them. Next was they allowed me the time and space to learn to become a better communicator and learn to how do I help others help me in the best way. And finally, no developer is an island. Joining the community of Scala developers has taught me so much already and is what led me to doing this talk today. So learning a new language always comes with a few humbling experiences, and for me this tends to be in the form of making lots of mistakes. Especially when you're kind of learning a new language, there's always going to be pitfalls, and as a junior developer, when this is the first language that you've learned, sometimes functional programming can be quite hard and has lots of stumbling blocks. I felt that during my first few months, I was kind of running into lots of like hurdles over the kind of like smallest mistakes. And one thing that kind of gives me a bit of comfort looking back is that everybody has gone through this, and also senior developers that I worked with allowed me the time and space to do so. So to senior developers, during these first few months when you're training juniors, let us fail. I know it's really tempting to want to jump in and solve our problems for us, but we need to be able to refine our own thought processes, and whilst you showing us how you would solve something shows us your logic and your reasoning, we need to be able to do this ourselves. So allow us the time and space to do so and help us to understand where we're going wrong. We'll benefit far more from what we did wrong and learning from it rather than what we got right first time or what you showed us how to do first time. Following on from this, let us solve the easy problems first. So in my first few months, I was given kind of smaller features, smaller tasks to work on, and I was able to progress and start making PRs. And even though there were small features, it showed me that I was making some progress, even if it felt like I was moving really slowly or learning really slowly. Being able to do this and being able to work on these small features meant I was able to learn in a very kind of consequence-free environment, and again showed me that I was actually making progress and that I was able to get feedback through PRs and kind of see where I was going wrong and where I was going right. As I gained skills, my confidence grew, and it meant I could go on to solve more and more complex problems and start working on more challenging features. I tend to want to bite off a bit more than I can chew, and working in this way and working on these small features helped me to avoid doing this and avoid getting overwhelmed with working on kind of like huge tasks. So this leads me on to the concept of the developer's rubber duck. Hopefully we all know kind of what this anecdote is of when you're working on a problem and you're trying to get help, if you articulate the details of your problem to a rubber duck, it, like magic, is able to kind of point out to you exactly where you're going wrong without it having to say a single word to you. I found that it was only when I went to verbalize the problems that I was working on that I would be able to very clearly see the answer that I was looking for, and that things would kind of start to click. I found it really useful being able to turn to colleagues and say, do you have a second so that I can kind of talk through this problem with you? And doing so saved me hours and hours of, going around in circles, missing the really obvious mistake or where I was going wrong, because they were able to help either point it out to me or kind of show me where I was going wrong. So to the senior developers, be our developer's rubber duck. at least until we've had the chance to kind of build up intuition on how do we solve problems and how do we work through things for ourselves. I think it's also really good for seniors to be able to hear very specifically what problems we're working on and what things are kind of tripping us up. The further away you are from being a beginner, the more likely it is you're going to forget all of those specific pain points that you went through as a junior. And knowing what we're struggling with specifically will give you a better gauge of what our level of knowledge and understanding is, and hopefully help you to explain things pitched at the correct level rather than over-explaining or under-explaining it to us. So that was a little bit on the importance of using mistakes as a learning tool. Now on to how do you help others help you? So as a junior, when you've come across a problem that you don't understand where you're going wrong and you need to ask for help, how do you convey this and how do you help others to help you? The answer to this question, I think, is rooted very much in a skill that is often overlooked in our jobs, and that is effective communication. Being able to do this well as a junior developer will help make your life and your learning journey so much easier. At the beginning of learning Scala, there felt like there was an insurmountable amount of information that I had to take on very quickly. And at times it was very challenging, and I came up against lots of different problems that I didn't feel like I could tackle. And when I was reflecting on this first year of learning, I realised that I had to learn to discern between, do I not understand the context of what I'm working on? So what does our application do? Why are we doing it in this way? What are the motivations behind it? Or do I not understand the Scala? Do I not understand how we've done it in the general functional programming concepts that go behind this? By understanding first what category my problem fell into, I was then able to go on and better ask for help when I knew, what I was actually trying to ask. When the issue is context, I have a bit of a checklist that I like to go through to try and gain some better understanding. So first up is always docs. I always read the docs as a junior engineer. I find that being in a team that has good internal documentation, or at least have documented some of the design decisions that they've made behind their platform, is really helpful. And as I'm assuming most people in this room are senior engineers, if you know of good documentation or resources that are, really solid and kind of explain things well, save us the hours of trawling through Confluence and kind of point us to them. Next is what I don't understand is code-based. I like to look at the history of the code, so I will have a look at the PRs that are associated with the code and kind of read through the ticket and read through the different kind of comments that were made. And a caveat with this one is this only really works when your team writes good PRs. So let this be a bit of a nudge to be a good human and write good PRs. Finally, one-to-ones are a really good way for me as a junior developer to pick senior engineers' brains and trying to ask them the more bigger picture questions on context. So if I don't understand something that's more general than the Scala, I will try and save these for when I'm speaking to people one-on-one. And I think for senior engineers, it's also a great way for you to spot any misunderstandings, and you can clear them up very easily by talking to your juniors and going through that process and explaining it to them. On the flip side, when the problem I have is with understanding Scala, I again have a bit of a checklist that I like to go through. First is the internet, every developer's best friend. The chances are, if you're trying to use a function in the standard library you don't understand, that somebody somewhere on Stack Overflow or any of the other resources will have answered it already. Next port of call when this doesn't work, and it doesn't usually work very often, is I will kind of go to one of the talented developers that I work with. So this is where the art and skill of communication really comes into play. When I first started learning Scala at the start of my job about a year and a half ago, I had a bit of a bad habit of asking questions with little to no context, and I would hope that whoever I was asking them to would just understand what I was talking about. Unsurprisingly, this was a very frustrating process for everybody involved. To help make this a little bit easier, a senior developer that I worked with kind of helped me with this formula of how to phrase questions. So first would be context. So what are you working on? What part of the repository are you in? What part of the code base? Next is, what are you actually trying to achieve with the code that you're writing? What is the goal of what you're trying to do? Next is, what is the actual question you're trying to ask? What are you trying to get out of this interaction with the senior developer? And finally, what are your previous attempts and what have you already kind of tried and what resources have you used already? Being forced to organise my thoughts in this way has made it so much easier in that sometimes I've been able to see what the problem was in the first place, and I've not had to actually have that much input from whoever I'm asking. So hopefully you're getting a little bit of deja vu about a certain rubber duck. Now, as I've said, the senior developers I worked with are without a doubt what made the biggest difference to my learning journey in Scala. But what qualities actually kind of made this the case about them? One thing that sticks out amongst them is they are really good at long-term laziness. So when I've asked them for help, they have shown me how I should solve the problem rather than kind of giving the answer straight to me. And as a result, when I see the same problem or something similar, I know how to tackle it and I don't have to go back to them again and again for the same questions. They've taught me the steps I should go through in order to solve this problem and kind of built confidence in my ability to do so, hence long-term laziness. The main way in which this is manifested in the interactions with senior developers has been through them asking me leading questions. So things like, what are you trying to do or what you're expecting your codes that you've written to do? What have you changed, even things that you think are completely unrelated? And sometimes we need a reminder of, is this bug caused because you're out of date with the remote? After being asked these questions, either we'll have kind of seen where we're going wrong without you having to give us much input, or you'll have spotted a misunderstanding or like a lack of knowledge that you've been able to go on and correct, and we've been able to progress. But the important thing is, you gave us the tools to solve the problem rather than doing it for us. So this takes us on to the final part of our talk today. We've looked at making mistakes and using them as an opportunity to learn from them. We looked at how do you improve your communication when you're working with senior engineers. And all that's left, and arguably the most important part, is community, and what brings us all here together today. The main reason I've enjoyed learning Scala so much this past 18 months or so is without a doubt the community of developers that I've joined. And I've been able to learn in a few different ways from this community. Training junior developers encompasses far more than just the functional Scala or FP language that they're writing. It includes things like, how do I use my IDE? How do I write good PRs? How do I use this build tool? And I've learned all of these majority of the time through peer programming. So pairing when two developers sit together and work jointly on a problem definitely has its pros and cons. First, two developers working on the same problem is not going to be solved in half the time. And next, it doesn't suit every single problem. Sometimes you need to be able to sit and work through a complex problem and not have to verbalize all of your different thought processes and kind of talk through what all these different blind alleys that you're going down. But for me, I think the benefits of pairing far outweigh the cons. So when you're pairing with somebody, you'll have fewer and far between bugs as you're having a constant code review as you're writing the code. Next is, once you've finished, you'll now have two developers that intimately understand the code as opposed to just one. Pairing also allows you to easily transfer knowledge of coding best practices to your junior engineers. And for me, pairing with my colleagues has helped me to feel like I'm a lot more of a welcome member of our team in that I've been able to get to know them better, but also understand how do they solve problems and what are their kind of logic and thought processes when it comes to working on features. So if you can't tell, I'm a huge advocate of peering. There are many ways of encouraging this peering culture in your teams, and I think for me what's made the biggest difference is when senior engineers that I've worked with have made it very clear they're available and willing to pair. It's a really effective way of building up your professional teams who know how to work well with each other and know what each other's strengths and weaknesses are. And if you're an engineering manager, I think it's really easy you can either very actively make it known that you're available to pair by saying this to people when you're assigning tasks, or it can be done quite passively by tagging different kind of like tickets with saying, this is a good opportunity for people to pair on it. Mob programming is also another form of kind of group programming that I've been lucky enough to encounter. So for those that don't know, where a group of developers gather into a room and work jointly on a project. The team I'm in now has these sessions roughly once a week, and instead of working on production issues, we've been looking at different toy projects. So to begin with, they kind of started from a colleague trying to teach different developers on our team her Scala knowledge, and then they just evolved into us working on these different projects. So first we did a Twitter clone where we looked at used different Scala libraries to implement endpoints, and then we've also looked at a simple chat room that had a WebSocket chat room and an Elm front end. Learning through building these side projects has had a huge benefit for me in that I've been able to explore different Scala libraries in a very simple context where I don't actually have to understand how this application works. I can just see what is the Scala doing itself. And it's also, and there's been times where the domain that I'm working in is a lot more complex than the Scala I've been writing, so being able to explore Scala in this context has been really beneficial. To the senior engineers, being able to teach Scala in this really relaxed environment is, as a junior who's experienced it, it's been really fun and a very effective way of being taught. And what I really loved about it was the variety of topics that kind of came up in conversation, where we would have kind of interesting discussions and I would be able to see, I like the solution to this problem and I can see how it applies to something that I'm working in my actual kind of day-to-day. So these sessions also give junior developers the space to ask kind of dumb questions and the space to not be seen to understand everything first time. I've also been taught in a more formal way where a developer I work with has run live coding sessions. So we looked at kind of different functional concepts as he was live coding them, and then had to go and implement them ourselves. Now, these take a lot of time and effort on the part of the developer, but they are greatly beneficial to your juniors because you're able to kind of impart best FP practices by getting them to actually do it themselves. So experienced developers can really have a massive impact, or they can have a massive impact on creating these learning experiences for juniors. So if you don't do this already, it can be as simple as showing your willingness to pair all the way up to actually setting up these kind of live coding sessions and these more formal training sessions. Mentoring and teaching is something I thought was much more reserved for people with far more experience than I have. However, in the past kind of year, we had an intern join our team, and I was able to help him on board and kind of show him different parts of the platform I'd worked on. And it showed me how much I had learned in the space of kind of 6 months at that point, and showed me where I needed to improve. For him, he was able to onboard in a very kind of non-intimidating way from somebody who could understand the challenges he was going through. So if it makes sense, have the juniors that you work with kind of help with onboarding new team members. It can start very small and incrementally give them more responsibility. And not only will it improve their communication, but also their technical understanding. And it'll give them perspective on what it's actually like to train juniors and to help other people grow. So to the senior developers, I hope this has given you a bit of an insight into the mind of a rookie Scala engineer. Allow us to fail and make mistakes, but help us to learn from them. Your knowledge and expertise is crucial to us becoming better developers and better communicators. And finally, you can have a key role in building these communities and creating these learning experiences for juniors, so when the opportunity arises, take it. I'd like to say a quick thank you to my team for their mentorship and support, and the organisers for giving me the chance to share my experience. Thank you.
Okay, so very quick, please.
You talked a lot about learning from your colleagues, so I just wonder, have you been working remotely or physically in person? And do you think that makes a difference?
I think it makes a massive difference. I've been in person since I joined as a grad, and before that I had done a placement that was entirely remote, and I learned far more in the first 6 months than I did in about like 13 months of placement. It's being able to just turn around and ask somebody really quickly to help you solve something rather than having to say, oh, can we go sit on a Zoom and can I ask you this question, just makes it so much easier. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks again. Sorry, no more time for questions. Break time.